Awesome.
All right. So last week, my friends and I, we chatted a little bit about the cyber kill chain. So a quick refresher here, right? So this was the first cyber kill chain that was created by Lockheed. And according to our conversation, this was sort of a very good first step in terms of identifying a very common typical attack paths that APT adversaries use about using email to phish and then attaching some type of malicious payload to it, right? And one of the audience member, what he really identified quickly was that one of the issues with this attack framework is that in terms of when some of these steps happen, for instance, the weaponization, the exploitation, and like creating the ability of the installation, all of that is not necessarily happening right after reconnaissance. What that means is when an attacker is attacking, after step one, he doesn't like, okay, now I have to do step two. A lot of this stuff happens behind the scenes, or there it happens together, but like off this timeline, right? So one of the things that we feel that would make this cyber kill chain much more powerful if we attach another statistics, another field to it, and that field would be the time in terms of how much time is spent there and where it takes place. So this weaponization, when you're doing reconnaissance, you're not weaponizing on the target. You're weaponize where weaponizing usually takes place is probably on your own test system in your own environment, right? And that's not really shown here. And for people who don't know how these advanced adversaries go through and sort of develop their tooling, right? That could be very misleading if you're just to take this cyber attack chain literally. So what after that, what we saw is an evolution, right? So we saw other cyber attack chains being developed, and with this one, I really like it because I feel like this more accurately represents what we're seeing most advanced adversaries, how they operate within a target network environment, right? So what you'll notice is a lot of the steps here for this first cyber kill chain that Lockheed Martin created, they're not here anymore, right? Some of them are either missing completely, or they could roughly be fitted into one of these more accurate stages, right? So yeah, so we felt like this was more accurate in terms of what adversaries are doing, but we should still question it in terms of where is this lacking, and how could this potentially be improved. And with that, right, so today I wanted to talk about this very amazing matrix attack for so the Mitre attack framework, right? So they created this, and basically what they did was they enumerated under each of the stages. So these are the high level stages here: recon, oh, this is cool. So they now created this research development. So I really like that. And then right, these are high level categories: initial, execution, persistence, priv s, defense evasion, credential access, discovery, and then lateral movement. I believe there's another field on the right as well. But under each of the stages, they also give the actual tactics, right? So they have all these different tactics. And so how this relates, so this is sort of a very accurate representations of the tactics, the tools, and the procedures that real advanced adversary actually uses. And so how we use this in the Cyberforce competition is we try to make sure that our playbooks and the type of vulnerabilities and attack that we use for the competition will cover a lot of these categories, right? So that's what we're going to try to do. And for students, so I think the best advice I have for students is you have to really spend a lot of time learning and understanding all the different technologies that you're responsible for defending. So we're talking about, operating systems. We're talking about networking protocols, ICS protocols, and all the various different subsystems and all the different activities that a system administrator has to sort of know and understand, right? That is the best way of getting good at cybersecurity. And from that list, that will take you years and years of practice and study to actually get good with all of those aspects, right? So that's the real way of getting really good at cybersecurity. But another way of sort of also covering categories that will be very useful for cybersecurity and for the cyber wars competition is to go through these different tactics and sort of number one, understand at a high level how these different stages are connected and how they work. And then when you get to the attack framework, understanding how these different tactics and techniques actually work and what are the different mitigations that are sort of recommended against them, right? So if you go into one of them, it says like these are the brute force technique, right? And that's a technique. And then underneath that, it gives you really good references, and it points out how real adversaries out in the real world are using this, right? And then it'll send you to articles that will give you more information with how these real adversaries are using it. And then it gives you some recommended mitigations and the ability of detection as well. So very important to sort of understand these two aspects of cybersecurity, mitigations and detections, right? And so that's the MITRE ATT&CK framework in a nutshell. And the next thing I wanted to share is statistics, right? So this is really important because I feel one of the big reasons I want to share this is I want to make it clear that real cyber attackers, because of their goals and their resources, they can act very differently from what pen testers and red teamers do that are professional white hats that help secure systems. And for the audience, you have to really think about that. It's like, wait a minute, why do red teamers differ in a lot of aspects from the real attackers? Even though there's also a lot of overlap in terms of they'll do some stuff that are very similar to a real adversary as well. So the really good red teamers, they'll do attack evasion, right? They'll be able to obfuscate or to change their malware in a way so that it would actually be executable against the most latest EDR technologies, right? They will do things to their tooling to bypass detection and IDS type systems, right? So they'll have that in common with the best cyber adversaries, but there are something about how red teamers work that because of the constraints that red teamers work will make them act in a very different way or make their tooling a little bit different from real adversaries. So that's why I think it's really important to make that distinction, because what I'm seeing a lot of times in the our industry from the defense vendors and the cyber force competitions, unfortunately, is sometimes we will tailor our tools against the white hat professionals, so specifically pen tester tools and red teamer tools. And in some of those cases, you're losing sight of what the real adversaries are actually doing, because that means you're sort of hyper tuning your defense against red teamers and pen testers. And that can be very different from the real adversaries. So I really want to make that distinction. But obviously, there are overlap there. So some of the techniques, for instance, if you have some defensive tactics against Mimikatz, and the real adversaries are using Mimikatz, it's like, okay, you're good. That means you're applying a defensive technique that applies to both because they're both using the same thing. But when you're seeing that the real attackers use something different, and you're not tuning your defenses for that, then you're going to completely be blind against that. And so I feel like this is a good segue for these kind of statistics I want to share here about cyber criminals, right? So number one, statistics for 2021, right? Number one is that cybercrime has gone up 600%. And so for us, right, this is a very scary number, but for us to sort of really sort of get a hold on why this is the case, why has that ballooned so much, we should start thinking about that, right? And gather data. It's like, okay, what's causing the uptick, right? So that's number one, and that's more of like an exercise for the audience. But the things I want to spell out and how this will have relationship for cyber defense competition, right, is like, number one, 92% of malware is delivered by email. So this is a fact of real attackers, right? And so if you're trying to have a high fidelity representation of real attackers, then you would have to do this. But what you'll notice is a lot of activities by pen testers, they're not spending 90% of their efforts on phishing for good reasons. And so, that's something you should think about. It's like, why do pen testers spend a lot of time doing a lot of other stuff that improves the cybersecurity of their customers, but they're not spending 92% of their efforts with email phishing, right? So that's something to think about. And then, unfortunately, as I mentioned in previous discussions, for the Cyberforce competition, due to how the network set up, we can't do phishing, end-to-end phishing, as real-world adversaries do. But we have our different ways of testing email security, and I feel like that's going to be very useful for the students. Okay, let's see another statistics that I really want to sort of share and emphasize. So, okay, there's probably going to be something about social engineering, right? So again, the sad fact is, in reality, 98% of cyber attacks rely on social engineering, right? And it's like, earlier we talked about STIGs, and we all agree STIGs are really amazing. They really improve our cybersecurity, but how much of that STIG is actually applicable to social engineering, right? So something to think about. And okay, the number of breach incidents by type. So again, a lot of these cyber defense competition that college students are taking part of, right? They're really much tailored in terms of just the vulnerabilities on the system, and very much tailored of an external attacker getting in, right? But when we look at the statistics from right here, the number of breaches and the source of it, right? Well, a lot of it is malicious outsider, but you have a lot of it that are from other sources as well. So for us, if we sort of want to take this into account for our cyber defensive competition, right? How can we do it so we can mimic the social engineering aspect of it? And also, hey, a large number of these breaches are accidental loss. Okay, how can you sort of create a scenario based on that and test the students based on that, right? So these are very important.
For the go back to the accidental. What
Yeah.
about, because they're using cloud?
Oh.
What about using DR scenarios? Like, just because you're security, you're working cyber, it doesn't mean you'll never deal with a DR scenario. And when you deal with a DR scenario, if you put it into a play, like, hey, your production servers just went down, your automated DR as a service has just come up, go make sure that it's running legitimately, because attackers are, actively going after it or whatever, which is a real example from what happened during Hurricane Ida. A local school, they blamed a breach, or not school, but a courthouse, Jefferson Parish Courthouse, I believe, blamed a cyber breach on the fact that they were running on backup systems that weren't secure. So that could be a play.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's a really good play, and it's very much along the lines of the play that Jesse and I have talked about, right? In terms of, we're having these really realistic scenarios that real defenders in the real world will have to understand, and ideally have that skill set to sort of practice that. And yeah, the play that you described, Jared, hopefully we can make something around that. I completely agree. So, okay, the last point I think I want to share for this statistics is, check this out, right? The average cost and time of a malware attack is 50 days, right? But for the CFC, right, the cyber competition, it's only 8 hours. So it's like, okay, that's super compressed. So it's like, in 8 hours, can we really somehow mimic the reality here, right, in the real world, that for one attack, it usually takes around 50 days to sort of take care, to sort of have detection and actually to mitigate, right, that, right? So according to how the Cyberforce competition is set up right now, as is, in terms of the clock time for playing, we wouldn't be able to do that if we just just have the red team just go at it for 8 hours. We're going to have to think about how can we create scenarios very similar to the DR one that Jared just shared, right? So that we can extract the skill sets that make sense, or the aspect of, what part of this 50-day attack is important, that we could somehow condense for one of our scenario plays within the Cyberforce competition itself. So, with that, unless there's any other comments, I'm going to end this presentation.